Hello, 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 and welcome back! After the summer break, Type 1 Thursday is back with me, Hannah. I am so delighted to be back after this a little bit longer than thought summer break, and of course, also, which is today's topic, which is also my pump break of 2020. Hashtag it, right? So I wanted to go through a little bit why I did it, a couple of disclaimers, pros and cons, and what I've been thinking about since then, and maybe even what my thoughts are for the future of pump breaks. But as some of you may have seen, I am back on the pump right now, so that I guess gives you a general thing of what I thought of MDIing for a while. And I have been MDIing for 28 years of my life, so it's not really like it's nothing new to me. It's not like I was diagnosed and then put on the pump straight away. I've only been on the pump for 8 years, but it's been 8 years without a break. I wanted to do a few disclaimers. First of all, disclaimer numero uno is that I was not sponsored by anyone doing this. I paid for my own insulin, I paid for my own pens, I paid for everything myself. So not sponsored, hashtag not sponsored, not by any fancy medical equipment or anything. I was just curious how I would feel going back on MDI in comparison to the pump. As I said, I've been on a pump for 8 years, so I wanted to check my skills. Disclaimer numero dos is that this only highlights my own experience. I can't speak for anyone else. I cannot regard this as anyone else's experience. This is my experience alone. This does not speak of anything in terms of the medicines I used or the equipment that I used or anything like that. This is just how it went for me. Very personal experience. So this is what I will be accounting for in this hopefully quite brief live stream and video. So my reasons for going on a pump break at all in the first place was that I wanted to keep the skill of MDI fresher than it is, or than it was with me right when I started. I managed to do 6 weeks of a pump break, so I was on MDI for 6 weeks, and I think it's really, really important to keep both sort of skills alive if you have the opportunity to have both, because you never know. You may lose your pump for one reason or the other. You actually physically lose it, or your insurance gets iffy about it, or the maker of your pump might go out of business, who knows, in this year, right? So there's so many reasons why you may not be able to continue on your desired pump. So that was one reason why I wanted to keep this MDI thing up. Also, number two is I've been on a pump for 8 years. You can imagine what my sites look like. Of course, we all have favorite sites, and although I really try to rotate, as much as humanly and physically and bendingly possible, there are always, scar tissue, and my sites were sore, and I was running out, and I felt like I didn't have that many, so I needed to give them at least a couple of weeks to heal, and that's another reason why I went on a pump break. And number three, or number C, as the reason why I started a pump break was, well, hey, summer. Usually you wear less clothing. It's a lot more convenient not wearing a pump, to be honest, if I can be that posh or that selective about it. It is easier tanning, it's easier to go swimming, it's easier to take a dip. For that reason, I chose the summer and not in the middle of winter, when you have to go up and actually pull up all your clothing and reveal your poor stomach and naked skin in the cold. So I was happy that it was summer. Now to the pros, and the pros of MDI that I rediscovered. I think I have explained this in another video, maybe quite at the beginning of Type 1 Thursdays. I described the pros and the cons, in my opinion, of MDI, and I think most of them were just enhanced, or I was just reminded of them. The pros of MDIing, which is multiple daily injections, which is what you do with insulin when you don't have a pump. So either with pens or syringes, usually you have to inject yourself multiple times a day. That's why it's called multiple daily injections, MDI for short. So the pluses are no tubing, of course. This is something that I can really get annoyed at sometimes, and especially while sleeping or while trying to get dressed or something, there's always something attached to me with a tube. I call it my tail sometimes because that's really how it feels, because it sort of goes with me wherever I go, whether I want to or not. But that was really, and I have tried the Omnipod before anyone says that. I was on the Omnipod for 4.5 years before this pump, my current pump. So it's not, that I don't know or I haven't tried a patch pump. I have tried it. In the end, we didn't get along that well, so that's why I swapped to this one. Anyway, no tubing is the number one benefit for me in terms of MDI. What you're used to, it's not really a bigger deal than that. It's a mindset shift. That's all it is, really. Number two is I had nothing that was in the way when I did yoga or when I was moving, hiking, as my post yesterday showed, or tanning, for example. There was nothing I had to keep in the shade and everything. It was actually the physical freedom of MDIing was amazing, and that's maybe something that I was the most happy about during my little 6-week experiment. And also, of course, like I mentioned at the start, swimming. Not having to bother with trying to stash your pump somewhere in your bag, making sure that no one can see it. It's also out of the shade, and so that you can go with good conscience into the water for longer than, a couple of minutes and still feel good, and your blood sugars are not going to be impacted or anything, because then you, of course, have the long-term or the basal insulin acting for you, and you don't have to do that through the pump as well. So the physical freedom, oh my god, I cannot even tell you how excited I was about that in the first couple of weeks. And I'm I was saying to my husband, I'm look, I can do all these things without, having something schlepping around on it and all of this stuff. It's the small things in life, right? So those are my big pros. So no tubing and physical freedom in all kinds of which ways possible. Now to the cons. And this is, I'm just going to mention them and then I will tell you why afterwards. I felt a huge sense of uncertainty. I felt that it was the basal insulin, because I wasn't used to it. It was a new basal insulin for me. And anyway, it's been 8 years since I was on a basal insulin the last time. So how could I expect knowing what I was getting into? But for me, it was uncertain, unpredictable, and time, because I didn't know how my blood sugar would react, which I do know with the pump. And I have realized now when I'm going back on the pump, I've been back on the pump for a week now, and I've really noticed, I'm oh yeah, this is what it's supposed to feel like. This is what I'm supposed to feel like, and this is what I'm supposed to be striving for in terms of certainty and security. I don't always know where my blood sugar goes, but at least I'll have a little idea, maybe, where it should be heading, at least, unless something is really wrong. And this actually made me develop some trust issues for my chosen basal insulin. My doctor wanted to prescribe me the same one that I had 8 years ago, but there was a new one that I hadn't tried, that I've heard that, or that I know that a lot of people are very, very, very successful in, and I wanted to try that one, and I was able to, and that was great. But I don't think that maybe in the 6 weeks that I tried it, that it was enough. Maybe that was my biggest issue and nothing else. Also, of course, I had a pen with fast-acting insulin, of course, because you need to have both. And that one, I can't microbolus on it. Sometimes I just really need to correct with 0.2 units or 0.8 units or, something like that. You can only do half unit corrections. So that for me was a huge missing part of me, where I couldn't, micro dose my insulin. I felt like the basal was very static in its way, because it takes a couple of days before when you do the changes, so you don't until you notice the difference. So that was, for me, was a little bit it wasn't flexible enough in that way for me, unless, of course, you find your perfect dose, and you know exactly where it goes. But I wasn't able to do that in 6 weeks. And this is actually something that I know for next time. I know what to focus on, and I can go at it more effectively, I hope. In the last sort of 10 days of this 6-week trial, I noticed that I gained a lot of weight. I'm not sure what that was regarding. It shouldn't have been in accordance with my monthly cycle, because I know that can happen too. I don't want to blame the insulin just like that, but it was something in the last 10 days, which since then has actually come off. So of course it was mainly water weight, and I really don't give two rats asses about my weight normally. I really do not. Noticing that it was something that I wasn't in control of screwing it up, sort of thing, that made me really curious. And now that it has gone back since, or gone away since I started on the pump or quit the basal insulin, I'm suspecting it could have something to do with the issue. But of course, I don't know, and we can never know. I feel like treating lows with on a basal insulin was more difficult than on a pump, because on a pump I can, if it gets really bad, I can just turn off the pump for a while, 15 minutes or 30 minutes depending on how bad it is, shove a couple of glucotabs in my mouth, and I know I'm safe. It's fine, there's no more insulin coming. But with the basal insulin, I didn't know how much had decrystallized, how much was active, how much was active in my system at that time. So that made, I had a very sticky low for half a day or something, and then of course it went up too high. And if you have been following me on social media, and especially on Instagram and my Instagram stories, I have shown you very many of my CGM lines throughout this practice run, and that's also something that that I will continue with, but it's not half as exciting now that I'm on the pump again. I also had a headache the last couple of days that nothing would kick this headache. I tried everything from electrolytes to salt shots to zero alcohol to more alcohol to CBD drops to more magnesium to more, all of it. I even took a painkiller for the first time in, I don't know, years. Okay, apart from a dental operation I had last year, but just, without a serious cause, I took a painkiller for the first time in years. It didn't budge. It just did not budge. It was in the background, and it was moving around and all this stuff, and I'm like, oh, please. And this headache, magically, 3 days after I took my last shot of long-acting, it disappeared. So I don't know if that had something to do with it, and that was a side effect. I'm not sure, but it could be, and that is some of my sort of experiences that I'm carrying with me till the next time I feel like doing a pump break for a little while. Then I have some tips and notes to self that some things that I realized and that I saw the difference between MDI and the pump, which is, I cannot even stress this enough because this screwed me up a couple of times in the beginning, but priming the needle of a pen every time before every injection is a huge thing. And this is something that I had forgotten about. So in the beginning, I'm like, oh, this is weird. I took that many units, but it didn't happen. So priming the needle, and then things got better. Also, it was weird because once or twice I ate more than I planned to, or more than I usually do. Just because it was really delicious food, and I don't want to deprive myself of any sort of food experience. So I ate more than I expected to. Of course, dosed the insulin to it. However, I felt like I became more insulin resistant after eating more than I normally do, which I don't really get on the pump. So that was really weird. And also, on MDI, I actually had spikes when I did high intensity workouts. So 3 times a week I try to do high intensity workouts just to get, my cardiovascular health, and it feels good, and I feel like I've achieved something. But I started getting spikes, blood sugar spikes on MDI, which I don't get on my pump. And also now when I do high intensity workouts, like yesterday, for example, and on Monday and last week, I don't get these spikes that I now that I'm back on the pump as I did on the MDI. So that's something weird. I just didn't feel as comfortable dosing on MDI as I do on the pump. So that was it's also a comfort thing, of course, and of course I'm very well aware that 8 years is a long time to get used to something, and then trying to switch your mindset to another thing that is very tricky. But I really I never got that security feeling, like I was saying in my cons part. I never got that security feeling from the MDI. For the future, I know that I have to, from the beginning, I have to up my basal a little bit more when I go on my next pump break, which is probably next summer, or if I go somewhere, if I get to go somewhere beachy in the future. So I'm gonna up my basal straight away and not maybe. And I know also now how to transition from the pump to basal. I will not kindly decline my endocrinologist's advice and go my own way, and also make sure that I do get some regular insulin to cover my meals with. That is my summary of Pump Break 2020. If you have any questions, please leave them in a comment. Have you done a pump break recently, or switched between MDI and pump, or from MDI to pump, or from pump to MDI, something like that? Let me know. What are your experiences? I'd love to hear them. Until then, I will see you next week here on Type 1 Thursday.